I'd like to welcome the Lakes campus who's joining with us now. You guys, we are kicking off a new series called Plan B. It's a pleasure to have you with us. We're so thankful for all that God is doing in you there at the Lakes campus. Okay, guys, let's get down to business. In 1 Samuel chapter 21, there is a story that many of you have read, but most of us are not familiar with, okay? And so in order to get there, I'm going to tell you the backstory leading up to this. Now, the story is about a man named David. Later in life, we call him King David, okay, which, just so you know, that kind of gives away the punchline of the story, okay? But early in life, he's not King David, he's just David. Shepherd boy David. In fact, if we go back far enough in the story, Israel this is the people of God. They've formed a formal, organized nation, and they've elected a king, and their king's name is Saul. S-A-U-L, Saul. Not to be misunderstood with the New Testament guy named Saul, who later changed his name to Paul. Is the water muddy enough yet? Okay, not that Saul. This is Old Testament, about 4,000 years ago Saul, who was the king of Israel, okay? Saul started out pretty well. He's a big, burly, strong, good-looking, handsome man. He looked like a king. The problem was on the inside, Saul did not have the integrity of a king. Have you ever been influenced by a leader who looked like a leader, but on the inside they didn't have the integrity to support it? You know, that's Saul. God's disappointed with Saul. God is frustrated with Saul, and God has decided to replace Saul. And Saul is not happy about that, okay? See, there's a whole other story in the dream that Saul has for his life and what's being shattered in him that we could talk about. David is one of many sons. His father's name is Jesse. Jesse is a landowner and a farmer, and David is the runt, okay? He's everybody's little brother. David is out working with the herd, and his other brothers are at home with his dad. And a guy named Samuel, who wrote, of course, the books of 1 and 2 Samuel, is a prophet of God. God has told him, it's time to replace Saul as our king. Go find a new king. Samuel starts to look. God says, go to Jesse's house. The king is one of Jesse's sons. Saul goes to Jesse's house. Hey, Jesse, one of your boys is going to be the new king. I would like to meet them. Tell which one of them is the new king. He meets David's oldest brother, another brother, third brother, all of them bigger, stronger, more athletic, more good-looking than David, and none of them are the one. Samuel says, none of these guys are the king. Do you have any other boys? Jesse says, well, just the runt. You know, he's out with the you don't want it. He smells like livestock, you know. They bring David in, and when Jesse sees this shepherd boy, Jesse hears Samuel, the prophet, say, that's the next king of Israel. And something happens. Just like in many of our lives, a dream is born. You ever had a dream born? When you start to think this is going to happen. God's going to use me for this. God's going to do this for me. In my life, a dream was born when I was pastoring a little church in Hardinsburg, Kentucky. I didn't know anything. I knew absolutely nothing, a little less than nothing. Take nothing, subtract something from it. That's what I knew about pastoring a church. I was there, and one of the things that I was told to do was visit the hospital when people are sick. So I go to the hospital, and I visit a man whose name, it's a true story, his name is Mr. Smart. And what's really cool is that the fact that his name is Mr. Smart makes the story even better. Mr. Smart was 104. 104 years old. This is 1996. That means he was born in the 1800s. Get what I'm saying? This is an old man. Mr. Smart had been in the hospital, Hardinsburg General, or whatever the name of the hospital is there, for well over a year. And nobody knew why he wouldn't die. Honestly. He was happy. He was in good shape. He was fine with dying. Mr. Smart was the oldest living Southern Baptist deacon in the state of Kentucky at the time. Literally, once he did die, and I was at his funeral, this whole bunch of men showed up and provided his family with a plaque saying, Mr. Smart was the oldest living deacon in the state of Kentucky. I mean, he was old, okay? And Mr. Smart, I'm sitting there, I'm praying for him. He's not talking. He's almost comatose. And out of nowhere, he reaches up and he grabs my hand, and he has this strange amount of grip for a 104-year-old, lifeless, almost dead man. And he grabs my hand, and he starts whispering. And so I lean down over him, and this man I don't know says something that scared the daylights out of me. He said, "God, may the blessings of my life pass on to this man." And I wanted to go, like, I don't even know you, you know? And it hit me. I got the chills. You guys ever get that? You know, I got chills. I step back. I'm intimidated. I don't know what he meant by that. And a week and a half later, he died. And for 6 months, I prayed through, what is that? And I started to ask questions just like David. What does that mean? Do I get to live to be 104? You know? I don't even know if I want to live to be 104. You know, is that a good thing? I don't know. But a dream is born, okay? A dream is born. Then David goes on about his business. A year goes by, and then another. His brothers, who become men, go off to fight a war against an army called the Philistine army. David stays at home with Jesse to take care of the sheep. He's the shepherd boy, remember? At this point, not even considered a man. One day, his father Jesse says, "Hey, David, listen, all your brothers, they're off at the field, the plain of whatever, they're fighting a battle. They're hungry. Take them some food." So David gathers up food for his brothers, puts it on a pack, takes off walking. And when he gets to the battlefield where the war is supposed to happen, he notices that off in the distance there is no fighting. You guys have heard this story before. Even if today's your first day in church, you've heard this story probably. He says that he notices that on one side, picture it as a big football arena. And on one side in the stands, you have all the guys from, I don't know, I wish the story had happened differently. They're all the UConn fans, okay? They're all off on one side, you know what I mean? And all the other folks are on the other side. Let's just say they're wearing, I don't know, blue. And they're both yelling for their teams. But in this story, they're not just like yelling and making fun and having a good time. They have weapons, and they're trying to kill each other. And out on the field in the middle, there's one guy. His name is Goliath. And he walks out on the field, and he starts cursing and making fun of the God of Israel. He starts saying all kinds of horrible things. And he basically says, if anyone has enough guts to fight me, you fight me. There's no reason for two armies to both risk death. Let's go mano a mano, one-on-one, and the winner is the winner of the battle. Now, Goliath, his size, you guys, it's not exaggerated. He's a giant. He's 9 feet tall. He weighs no telling how much. Everybody is shaking in their boots when they look at this man. Nobody says, I want to fight him. David sees this going on, and this dream in him starts to develop a little energy. And he thinks things like, who is this guy to talk about my God? Who does he think he is? I'm the future king of Israel. I will handle this. And so when no one's looking, the story's longer than I'm making it, but when no one's looking, he picks up 5 stones. He picks up basically a slingshot, and he goes out onto the field, and it upsets Goliath. Goliath is like, who are you people that you send a child, a shepherd boy, to come fight me? Then I love this. It says that David, this is a really cool sermon in its own, it says that David runs to the battle lines. In other words, David's not like sashaying across. He's not intimidated and walking slowly. David has had enough, and something wells up inside of him. He grabs 5 stones, he grabs a slingshot, and he runs right at Goliath. Goliath complains, who is this child? David says, you come at me with words and swords and all this stuff. I come at you with the power of the God of Israel, and with whip, 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 pow, rock to the center of the head. Goliath falls out flat. David walks up to him, picks up his sword, a sword that's so heavy that David can barely lift it. He drops the sword on Goliath and slices him at the throat, cutting off his head. Now that makes a statement, doesn't it? Okay. Something happens. Now a dream seems to be receiving a little bit of hope. See, you've had this happen too. When you thought or hoped that something was going to happen, you felt a dream, maybe, what if, I hope so, and then that job that you really want, they call you and they say, you had a really great interview. We'd like to talk to you again. Or that girl that you are head over heels in love with says, yeah, I'll go out with you. Or that school that you are dreaming of graduating from, you get a letter and it says, accepted. You see what I'm saying? That real estate agent calls you about that home that you're dreaming of living in and says they're willing to negotiate the price. And hope is invested or injected in your dream. All of a sudden, you start to believe it. You start to think, I think this is really, you guys, this is really going to happen. Now, I don't know about you, but with me, I'm a talker, believe it or not. And so I tend to, at this point in the stage, I start telling everybody, which is not always the best thing to do, but I start telling everybody, do you see what God's going to do in my life? God made this promise, I had this dream, and now I have hope, and it's going to happen, and I get all excited, you see what I'm saying? And all of a sudden something happens. But listen to David's story. David defeats Goliath. They carry him around the field as if he's the victor. He becomes the new national hero of Israel. King Saul is so happy with David at this point that he not only congratulates him, but he literally asks David to marry his daughter. Now, I know some men who have daughters of marrying age, okay? And I know some men, Lakes Campus, I know some men who are okay with the fact that their daughter wants to marry a guy. But I don't know anybody who has a daughter of marrying age that likes some young man so much that the dad goes to the guy and says, please marry my daughter. It just never happens. For Saul to think that much of David, you see what I'm saying? This is good. Not to mention, this is even more hope. God has told David he's going to be king. David says, I don't know about that. Now, David has slayed the giant. He is the national hero, and he is now son-in-law to who? The king. It's starting to look like God's going to do this. I have hope. Okay, long story short, we're going to skip ahead. Long story short, there is a disagreement. There are issues, and the family deals with something we like to call dysfunction. And it culminates with King Saul picking up a spear. I don't know if this has ever happened at one of your family reunions. Picks up a spear and throws it at David. Okay, spear, fork, beer bottle, something like that. Somebody's seen this at a family reunion, I'm sure, right? Okay, he picks up a spear and throws it at David. And at that point, David deals with what a lot of us have dealt with. He has a dream, and there has been hope. But now, you guys, all of a sudden, there is a threat. Something that seems to stand in the way of the dream. That job that you just got, that's all part of the dream, all of a sudden, the factory shuts down. That girl you've been dating for 6 months that you can see yourself with her forever, she breaks up. Maybe it's more painful. The pregnancy that you've been praying for ends in miscarriage. The marriage that you've invested so much in ends in divorce. See what I'm saying? All of a sudden, something seems to happen. At the beginning, you don't know whether or not the dream is shattered, but as time goes on, you can tell the dream is falling to pieces. The picture that you've drawn, not only are significant pieces of glass breaking on this picture, but literally the portrait is being torn into pieces. And all of a sudden you look at the reality photo and it looks absolutely nothing like the dream. And at that threat, you and I will face the same decision that David faces. And we will make decisions at that moment. And the decisions that we make at that moment will be the most important decisions that we make in our life. You see, you and I, like David, have a choice to make. And I want you to hear me carefully. I hope you go to lunch today talking about this, okay? At that moment, when there is a threat to your dream, to your hopes, you will either choose to trust God or you will choose to take control. And almost everything depends on that choice. David takes control. The same God who chose him from a field full of sheep. The same God who used him to defeat an unbeatable foe. The same God who took him into the house of the king and gave him a bride. The same God who had done all of those things, all of a sudden now, in David's mind, that God, get this, that God wasn't doing his job. And so David has to do it for him. And David takes control. You see, here's what happens at this point. We either trust God or we decide that God is not trustable. And in deciding that God is not trustworthy, we take control. And this leads us to 1 Samuel chapter 21, where David is making a decision. Would you read with me? 1 Samuel 21, the first verse says, by the way, David is running. His goal is to leave town and go amass an army, gather the army together, come back, take the country from Saul. That's how he's going to become king. See how that's taking control? He's going to forcefully make it happen. It says that David went to the town of Nob to see Ahimelech. That is the name of the priest in that town. Ahimelech trembled when he saw him, and he says, "Why are you alone? Why is no one with you?" Now, you have to picture this. He's the national hero. He's married to the king's daughter. Everyone has started to hear whispers that he is the next king of Israel, and he just sashays in the room all by himself. The priest says, "What is..." Okay, you just imagine, if you would, that someone, I don't know, someone like, we're in Kentucky, let's say John Wall, just walks in and sits down. Some of you are a little politically motivated. Let's say President Obama walks in. No Secret Service, nobody with him, no wife and daughters. He's just by himself thinking, "I heard you were moving in your new building today. I want to come worship with you." You know, just sits down, okay? The rest of us are wondering, what's going on? Why is he here? And why is he by himself? That's what Ahimelech is dealing with. And this is what David does. This is his answer. You know the story, right? You know where we've gotten. He says, "The king has sent me on a private matter." Is that true? Lakes Campus, is that true? No, the king tried to kill him, okay? "The king has sent me on a private matter," he says. "He told me not to tell anyone why I'm here. I have told my men where to meet me later. There are no men. There's no army, there's no men. David's just lying. He's making it all up. And now he says, 'I'm hungry. Give me something to eat.'" You guys get that? I tell you this because I want you to know a couple of things that we have to deal with, and I hope that you choose to think this. In the process of trying to seek control, in the process of going after what I would say is the greatest illusion on the planet, there is no control. You can't get control, even if you try to take it. In the process of doing that, what David does, and what you and I tend to do sometimes, is that David decides to abandon his God-given values in an attempt to reach his God-given dream. We do it all the time, don't we? We want to be a husband, and so in the process of trying to find a wife, we date in a way that's ungodly. We want to be a parent, so in order to try to have a child, we make choices that are not what God would guide us to do. We want to make money and have a house or have a job. So in order to get those things, we're tempted to sidestep ethics and move forward. Do not do what David did, you guys. Don't abandon your God-given values in pursuit of your God-given dream, because that is the definition of taking control. Here's how it works in my life. This exact story might not apply to everybody, but I think that you'll be able to draw application from it in some way. I get a phone call about every other week from somebody who goes to another church. Now, they know, if you know me very well, you would know, I have a dream of planting a life-giving church that changes people's lives, that grows like crazy, that changes families, marriages, kids, that helps send a whole lot of people to heaven. That's my dream. That's my life. That's it, okay? And so when more people show up and that's all good. That's all part of the dream. That's good, right? So I get a phone call about every other week from somebody, and they'll go, is this Pastor Brad Henson? I'll say, of course, yes, it is. They'll say, I got to tell you something, Pastor Brad. Can I just tell you about my church? Okay. And then they'll proceed to tell me something like this. They moved us all out of the sanctuary. They got rid of all of our pews. They painted the floor. Can you believe they painted the floor? They brought in these goofy-looking lights. You know what I'm saying? They put this stuff on the walls. I don't know what is going. I just don't know what's up with them. I'm thinking about leaving, and I thought I would come to Four Rivers on Sunday. Okay, now here's where it comes down to me. As part of my dream, I would love for them to come to Four Rivers on Sunday, right? I mean, that's part of what I would love. That would be great. But my ethic, my value says, don't cause division in another church. Don't become a problem for another congregation. Don't hurt, help. And so 95% of the time, what I have to do if I want to follow God-given values is say to them, don't leave over something like that. Don't come to Four Rivers. We have painted floors and we took out the pews too. You know, you're going to like it. You know, don't do that. Your pastor's a good guy. You need to go talk to him. Love the church. Learn to deal with it. Get through your problems. See what I'm saying? And I got to tell you, there are times when, I'm just being blunt, there are times when I know that person invites a lot of other folks too. And I know that person brings a lot of money. And I know that person is really talented. And I know that person could add a lot. But I have a choice to make, and that choice is, am I going to abandon my God-given values in order to reach a God-given dream? David chooses to do it. He lies to the priest to get what he wants. And you're about to see how that turns out. In verse 8 of that passage, we're told this. Verse 8 says this, David asked Ahimelech, do you have a sword or a spear? The king's business, I love this lie, okay? This sounds like an 8-year-old lie. The king's business was so urgent that I didn't even have time to grab my sword. The dog ate it or something, you know? Ahimelech just bites. He goes, okay. And then basically Ahimelech says, we only have one sword here, but you can have it. Now get this. This is great. I never understood this. Okay? Get this. The only sword we have here, David, is the one you used to kill Goliath with. We have Goliath's sword. We've wrapped it up in felt. It's on display. Everyone comes here to see it. Now, time out for a second. Lakes Campus, time out with me. Why is this one sword in a temple on display? Why? Because it's an icon of God's faithfulness. The people of Israel, many of them were not at the battlefield. They did not see the Philistine giant fall, but when they come to the temple to worship and they stand there and they see the sword and they hear the story and they know of David, the boy who defeated Goliath, the giant, with that sword, it becomes an epic visual for God's faithfulness. Now listen, your life and my life, our lives are filled with icons of God's faithfulness, memories, things that God has done in our lives, times when we needed Him and He showed up, times when we needed a miracle and that's exactly what He gave us, times when we were sick and He made us well, times when we were broke and He provided for us food, times when we were alone and He brought us friendship. Don't we? This is how it starts. When someone first comes to know Christ, they give their life to Christ and He forgives their sins. And in a very real way, they experience what it means to be cleansed. That's your first icon of God's faithfulness. When you realize no sin was too great, no offense was too harsh for God to say, I forgive you. But then after that, that's not all there is. After that, there are moments, times, developments where all of a sudden we grow faithful. And the second point for the day is this. You must have a way in your life. You and I must have a way in your life, Lakes Campus, to remember God's faithfulness, or you will never trust Him with your future. David picks up the sword that should have reminded him that God is God, should have brought back the memories of who God is, and with that sword, he continues in sin he continues to take control, and he walks right past this icon of God's faithfulness and does not remember. Shortly thereafter, Saul finds out that David has the sword. Saul finds out that Ahimelech, the priest, gave David the sword. Saul sends men to Ahimelech. He asks him, "Why have you conspired against me?" Ahimelech said, I didn't conspire against you. He told me he was working for you. King Saul doesn't believe him. King Saul slaughters him, his family, and 80-something other priests. Literally, King Saul, who's a horrible guy at this point in the story, slaughters an entire spiritual commune of people because he's so angry at David. One person, one son of Ahimelech escapes. He goes into Gath. He finds David, and he basically says this to him: "You killed my father. You lied to my father. My father trusted you. My father gave you the sword that was rightfully yours. And now my father, my mother, my family, all of my friends, they are all dead." And finally, David gets it. It hits him. When there was a threat to my dream, I took control instead of trusting God. And now that I took control, I have caused some horrible outcomes. And this many people are dead because of me. To summarize the ending, David decides to change sides. He gives up control, and he becomes a faithful, trustworthy follower of God again. Does that make sense? And what's really cool is that God ends up continuing to bring about the dream. It's a picture of redemption, isn't it? Here's the deal. We all as a people are regularly going to face, you're not going to get out of this, folks. You're regularly going to face moments in life when your dream is threatened. And at that point, you will have to make a decision whether or not to trust God or take control. And I promise you, what I'm about to say, the most important thing I'm going to say today, the choices you make while taking control of your life to try and keep God from messing up your dream that He gave you will be the worst decisions that you ever make. For many people, on their deathbed, looking back over their life, the things that they would write down in the regrets category are choices they made while freaking out, trying to take control of a shattered dream. Would you pray with me?